They called us puny, weak, an insignificant speck in the vast expanse of the galaxy, barely worth acknowledging, let alone fearing. But when the Crawl launched their merciless onslaught against the defenseless Ferengi, they were about to learn just how wrong they were to underestimate the tenacity and sheer unconquerable spirit of humanity. Lieutenant Alexander Bell gripped the armrests of his chair as the distress signal blared through the comm system of the small human exploration vessel. He checked the coordinates again, his heart pounding. A star system only a few light-years away. First contact scenario, and from the urgent, repeating tone of the message, the stakes couldn't be higher. "Set a course, maximum speed," Alexander ordered, his voice steady despite the adrenaline surging through his veins. "If someone out there needs help, we're damn well going to provide it." As the human ship dropped out of warp speed on the outskirts of the system, Alexander stared out the forward viewport in disbelief. A massive alien fleet, ships bristling with advanced weaponry, swarmed around a comparatively tiny transport vessel like a pack of wolves about to devour a rabbit. Scans quickly identified the besieged ship, Ferengi, a peaceful species renowned for their technological prowess but utter lack of military might. And they were about to be slaughtered. "Tail them," Alexander barked out, never taking his eyes off the grim spectacle. No response on any frequencies. He turned to face his crew, jaw set with resolve. "I'm going to take a shuttle. Try to dock with the Ferengi ship and render assistance. I need the rest of you to keep those hostiles busy. Buy me some time." Objections rose swiftly from his officers. Boarding a ship under active attack, with no backup? It was suicide. But Alexander cut them off with a chopping motion. "We're the only ones close enough to respond. If we don't act, the Ferengi die. It's that simple. And I don't know about all of you, but I refuse to sit back and watch an entire species be exterminated, not while we have the power to do something about it." Reluctant nods all around. They all knew the risks, but they also knew their duty. As Alexander launched the shuttle and angled it toward the embattled Ferengi vessel, he watched his crewmates engage the enemy fleet. The human ship was dwarfed by the aggressors, their hulls emblazoned with a symbol he'd never seen before. "Steady," he whispered to himself as the shuttle shook and bucked, narrowly evading the sizzling streaks of weapons fire crisscrossing the void between the opposing ships. "Steady." With a bone-rattling impact, he crash-docked with the Ferengi craft, the shuttle's flexible docking collar deforming to seal against the breached airlock. Alexander was in motion before the tremors ceased, sprinting through the smoke-choked corridors of the alien ship, a miniaturized medikit clutched in one hand, a standard-issue plasma pistol in the other. He found a single Ferengi survivor huddled in the engine room, long limbs wrapped around a pulsing blue cylinder that could only be the ship's power core. The alien was badly wounded, leaking viscous amber ichor from a dozen deep gashes. "It's okay, I'm here to help," Alexander said softly as he knelt beside the quivering Ferengi. The alien watched him warily with liquid onyx eyes, its grey skin ashen with pain and fear. Activating his almost never-used translation implant, Alexander fought past the blinding headache to send a simple message. "Friend, help." Working swiftly but carefully, Alexander applied pressure bandages and coagulant gel to the worst of the lacerations, marveling at how human medicine could adapt to even the most exotic xenophysiology. He'd studied the techniques in training, but never thought he'd actually use them in the field, let alone in the middle of a space battle. As the bleeding slowed, the Ferengi gestured weakly to itself. "Vox." Alexander mirrored the gesture. "Alexander." Then Vox launched into a rapid-fire series of images and sensations, transmitted through the touch telepathic field of its species. And Alexander understood. The Crawl, ruthless conquerors, attacking anyone they perceived as weak, defenseless. The Ferengi had been all but wiped out, forced to flee their homeworld. And the Crawl would not stop until they were all dead. Rage, cold and pure, ignited in Alexander's chest. This was wrong. Nobody deserved extermination for the crime of being peaceful. He looked Vox straight in the eye, no translation needed. The Ferengi saw his intent as clear as a solar flare. The human rose to his feet and strode to the shuttle's comm unit, hailing his ship. "New mission, people. We're defending the Ferengi, whatever it takes." Alexander smiled, and it was a smile that held absolutely no mirth. "We're also human. The Krall think that makes us tiny, weak, no threat at all." He thought of all the stories he'd heard growing up, of humans facing impossible odds, staring down foes 100 times stronger, and prevailing, through sheer grit, ingenuity, and the flat-out refusal to accept defeat. Well, it's time to show them what tiny and weak can do when the cause is just, and the cause has never been more righteous than this. So gear up, get creative, and start making those Krall regret the day they dismissed humanity. Alexander's fingers flew across the comm panel as he sent an urgent message back to Earth. His heart pounded, the adrenaline from the recent battle still coursing through his veins. "Admiral Tyson, this is Lieutenant Bell. We've made first contact with 2 alien species, one peaceful, one not so much." Alexander recounted the events, the Ferengi distress call, the Krall attack, the desperate defense. He could almost see Tyson's frown deepening with each word. "Sir, we need reinforcements. The Krall are relentless. They won't stop until the Ferengi are wiped out." A long pause. "Bell, you know we can't just jump into an alien war." Another pause. Alexander held his breath. "All right, Lieutenant. I'm sending Captain Hawkins and his squadron, but tread carefully. We're in uncharted territory here." Relief flooded through Alexander. "Thank you, sir. We won't let you down." Hours later, a fleet of sleek human warships dropped out of hyperspace. Alexander's chest swelled with pride as he recognized the lead vessel, the USS Intrepid, commanded by his old mentor. Captain Hawkins' face appeared on the monitor, a mix of pride and concern in his eyes. "Quite a situation you've gotten yourself into, Alex." "Just following your example, sir," Alexander replied with a grin. Hawkins shook his head. "Let's hope it doesn't get us all killed. What's our next move?" In the Ferengi ship's makeshift medbay, Alexander sat with Vox. The alien's wounds were healing, but a deep sadness lingered in his eyes. "Tell me about your people," Alexander said softly. "Why are the Krall so intent on destroying you?" Vox's voice trembled as he spoke. "They came without warning. Millions dead in the first attack. We managed to drive them back, but at great cost. Since then, they've hunted us across the stars. They see our pacifism as weakness, something to be purged from the galaxy." Alexander's fists clenched. "We won't let that happen." As they traveled through hyperspace, human engineers swarmed over the Ferengi vessel, repairing systems and establishing proper communication links. Alexander spent hours with Vox, learning about Ferengi culture, sharing stories of Earth. The calm was shattered as they exited hyperspace. Krall ships materialized around them, weapons blazing. Alarms blared as the human and Ferengi ships scrambled to defend themselves. "They tracked us through hyperspace," Hawkins' voice boomed over the comms. "All ships, evasive maneuvers." The space around them erupted into chaos. Human ships darted and weaved, their advanced weapons tearing into Krall hulls. But for every Krall ship they destroyed, 2 more seemed to take its place. "We can't keep this up," Hawkins growled. "Bell, what about that nebula? Our sensors show it'll play havoc with targeting systems." Alexander studied the readings. "It's risky, but it might be our only shot." "Agreed. But we need to buy time for the Ferengi ship. It's too damaged to outrun the Krall." Alexander's lips pursed. "I'll lead a fighter wing, draw their fire." "It's the only way, sir." A reluctant nod. "Go and come back alive, you hear me?" Alexander sprinted to the launch bay, his heart racing. Moments later, he led a squadron of fighters straight at the Krall flagship. "All wings, focus fire on their command deck. Let's give them something to think about." The human fighters unleashed a barrage of missiles, peppering the massive Krall ship. On the flagship's bridge, the Krall commander, Vakar, snarled in rage. The Kroll fleet turned its attention to Alexander's squadron, giving the Ferengi ship its chance. It limped towards the nebula, the rest of the human fleet providing cover fire. His wingmen peeled off, but Alexander's damaged fighter couldn't keep up. He watched helplessly as Vakar's ship closed in. Vakar's laughter echoed through the comm. Foolish human. Did you really think you could challenge the might of the Kroll? Alexander gritted his teeth, preparing for the end. Suddenly, a barrage of advanced missiles streaked past his fighter, slamming into Vakar's ship. The Ferengi vessel emerged from the nebula, its weapon systems fully restored. "Sorry we're late," Vox's voice crackled through the comm. "Thought you could use a hand." Alexander let out a whoop of joy, pushing his damaged fighter towards the nebula. As they regrouped inside the swirling gases, a sense of relief washed over the crews. On the bridge of the Intrepid, Alexander stood with Hawkins and Vox studying star charts. "There's a hidden Ferengi colony not far from here," Vox said. "We can resupply, plan our next move." Alexander nodded, his mind racing with the implications of what they'd started. This was more than just a rescue mission now. It was the beginning of an interstellar alliance, a stand against the tyranny of the Kroll. As they set course for the colony, Alexander couldn't help but wonder what challenges lay ahead. But one thing was certain: humanity had taken its first steps onto a much larger stage, and there was no turning back now. The human and Ferengi ships emerged from hyperspace, the secret Ferengi colony coming into view. Nestled within a dense asteroid belt, the settlement was barely visible among the tumbling rocks. Alexander exhaled slowly, his hands gripping the command chair. "Take us in slow," he ordered. "We don't want to spook them." As they approached, a crackling transmission came through. "Unidentified vessels. State your purpose or be fired upon." Alexander leaned forward. "This is Lieutenant Alexander Bell of Earth. We've come seeking refuge and to offer aid against the Kroll." A tense silence followed. Then, "Proceed to Docking Bay 3. Any hostile action will be met with immediate force." The ships eased into a cavernous hangar carved from the asteroid's interior. Alexander and Vox disembarked, greeted by a contingent of armed Ferengi. At their head stood an elderly Ferengi, his wrinkled face etched with worry. "I am Zahn, leader of this colony," he said, eyeing the newcomers warily. "We appreciate your assistance against the Kroll, but why involve yourselves in our fight?" Alexander stepped forward. "We seek only to protect the innocent and stand against tyranny. The Kroll threaten all peaceful species, humans included." As repair crews swarmed over the battle-damaged ships, Alexander, Vox and Zahn gathered in a makeshift war room. Holodisplays flickered to life, showing Kroll fleet movements and attack patterns. "Their ships are faster, more heavily armed," Zahn said, gesturing to the displays. "But we've studied them for years. There may be weaknesses we can exploit." Vox leaned in, studying the data. "What about their communications? If we could disrupt their ability to coordinate—" Meanwhile, across the galaxy, Admiral Tyson stood before Earth's Security Council. "We cannot stand idly by while the Kroll slaughter innocents." A councilwoman shook her head. "And risk dragging humanity into an interstellar war? The Kroll haven't attacked us directly." "Yet," Tyson countered. "If we don't stand with the Ferengi now, we'll face the Kroll alone later." Hours of debate followed, voices rising in heated argument. Finally, the council president spoke. "Very well, Admiral. You have authorization to send additional ships and resources, but tread carefully. We cannot afford a protracted conflict." Back at the Ferengi colony, alarms blared. A breathless scout burst into the war room. "Massive Kroll fleet incoming. They must have tracked our hyperdrive signatures." Alexander and Zahn exchanged grim looks. "How long?" Alexander asked. Zahn's shoulders slumped. "We're not ready. Our defenses—" "Then we buy you time," Alexander interrupted. He turned to Vox. "We take a small fleet, use the stealth tech to lure them away. The rest stay here, fortify the colony." Vox nodded. "I'm with you." As they rushed to their ships, Zahn called out, "There's a nebula nearby full of volatile gas pockets. if you can lure them there. Alexander grinned. Perfect. Soon a dozen ships lifted off, shimmering as the stealth field engaged. They rocketed towards the incoming Kral armada, sensors dark, running silent. On the Kral flagship, Vakar snarled at his crew. "Where are they? Find those vermin!" Suddenly a flash of movement. Vakar leaned forward, eyes wide. "There, all ships, pursue!" The Kral fleet split, chasing phantom sensor readings deeper into space. Alexander's voice crackled over the comm. "Almost there. Get ready to light this candle." They burst into the nebula, swirling gases enveloping them. Kral ships followed, weapons firing blindly into the clouds. Alexander's fingers hovered over the detonator. Now. A series of explosions rippled through the nebula. Kral ships vanished in balls of fire, the chain reaction spreading rapidly, but through the inferno, Vakar's flagship emerged, bearing down on Alexander's vessel. As shuttles streamed away from his ship, Alexander dove and weaved through the burning wreckage. Vakar's ship pursued relentlessly, its weapons slowly overwhelming Alexander's shields. Just as hope seemed lost, Vox's ship appeared from behind a gas cloud, ramming Vakar's flagship. Alarms blared as Alexander's ship shuddered. "Vox, get out of there!" "Go," Vox shouted back. "I'll keep him busy." Alexander's engines flared as he retreated. On his view screen, Vakar's enraged face appeared. "This isn't over, human. I will hunt you to the ends of the galaxy." As the asteroid belt came into view, Alexander gripped the controls tightly. What's waiting for us down there? He wondered aloud, steeling himself for whatever came next. Alexander's fingers dug into the armrests of his command chair as the battered fleet dropped out of hyperspace near the Ferengi colony. His eyes scanned the view screen, searching for signs of destruction. To his surprise and relief, the asteroid belt housing the hidden settlement appeared intact. "We're being hailed," his communications officer announced. "On screen," Alexander ordered, his voice hoarse from shouting orders during their recent battle. Alexander let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. "What's the situation, sir?" "It was touch and go for a while," Hawkins replied. "The Kral hit us hard, but we held the line. Your diversion bought us the time we needed to get our defenses in order." Tactical displays flickered to life, showing the retreating Kral ships. But one blip remained stubbornly close, Vakar's damaged flagship. "He's regrouping," Hawkins said, pointing to incoming sensor data. "And he's not alone. We're picking up reinforcements on an intercept course." Alexander studied the displays, his mind racing. "We need to evacuate," he said finally. "This colony isn't sustainable as a long-term defensive position." Zahn bristled. "Abandon our home after all we've sacrificed to defend it." "We don't have a choice," Vox interjected, placing a hand on the elder Ferengi's shoulder. "If we stay, we die. At least this way, our people survive." A tense silence fell over the room. Finally, Zahn nodded. "What do you propose?" Alexander outlined his plan, using the colony's transwarp drive to evacuate civilians while setting a trap for Vakar. As the others debated the details, he caught Hawkins' eye. The captain gave him a subtle nod of approval. Hours later, Alexander stood in the colony's massive hangar bay, watching as Ferengi civilians boarded evacuation ships. Vox coordinated the exodus, his voice calm but urgent as he directed families to their assigned vessels. "That's the last group," Vox announced, jogging over to Alexander. "The transwarp drive is primed and ready." Alexander clasped his friend's shoulder. "Good luck. We'll rendezvous at the rally point." As Vox's ship disappeared in a flash of transwarp energy, Alexander turned to the grim-faced volunteers who had stayed behind. "Let's give Vakar a welcome he won't forget." They worked quickly, rigging munitions throughout the colony's outer defenses. Alexander's hands flew over the reactor controls, carefully modifying the antimatter containment fields. Sweat beaded on his forehead as he calculated the precise yield needed to obliterate Vakar's flagship without destroying the entire asteroid belt. Alarms blared. "Kral ships entering the system!" Hawkins' voice rang out over the comms. Alexander sprinted to the automated transport, securing the modified reactor in its cargo hold. He paused at the airlock, locking eyes with Hawkins. "This is insane, you know that," the captain said. Alexander grinned. "Learn from the best, sir." As he sealed himself in the pilot's seat, Alexander watched Hawkins' ships engage the Crawl fleet. Explosions blossomed in space as hidden charges detonated, catching Vakar's forces off guard. Alexander gritted his teeth and punched the throttle. The transport shot forward, weaving through the chaos of battle. Crawl energy beams lanced past his viewport, the ship's hull groaning under the strain of evasive maneuvers. Vakar's flagship loomed before him, its weapons focusing on the small transport. Alexander's fingers flew over the controls, plotting a collision course with the Kral ship's primary hull. "Hey, Vakar," he shouted into the open comm channel. "Catch!" Alexander smacked his palm on the eject button. As his escape pod rocketed away from the transport, he caught a glimpse of it impacting Vakar's ship. A blinding flash erupted, the antimatter explosion consuming the Kral flagship in a sphere of pure energy. The shockwave battered Alexander's pod, sending it tumbling through space. His head slammed against the bulkhead, and darkness claimed him. He awoke to the familiar beep of medical equipment. Alexander's eyes fluttered open to find Hawkins and Vox standing over him. "Welcome back to the land of the living," Hawkins said with a smirk. Alexander tried to sit up, wincing at the pain in his ribs. "Did it work?" Vox nodded. "Vakar's ship is nothing but scattered atoms. We bloodied the Kral nose, but—" "But what?" Alexander asked, noting the concern in his friend's eyes. Hawkins helped him to his feet, leading him to a nearby viewport. "See for yourself." Alexander's breath caught in his throat. A vast armada of Kral ships stretched as far as the eye could see, their weapons glowing with malevolent energy as they approached at maximum warp. "More than we can handle," Hawkins replied grimly. "This was just the beginning. The real war is about to start." As klaxons sounded and crew members rushed to battle stations, Alexander exchanged determined looks with Hawkins and Vox. They had won the first round, but the true test of their commitment and the future of the cosmos lay ahead. Alexander's eyes narrowed as he studied the tactical display, the vast armada of Kral ships filling the viewscreen with an ominous glow. He turned to Captain Hawkins, his voice low and urgent. "Sir, we can't face this head-on. We need another option." Hawkins nodded grimly, his weathered face etched with concern. "Agreed, Vox Zan, any ideas?" The Ferengi leaders exchanged glances. Vox stepped forward, his large ears twitching nervously. "There may be one possibility. The Krelok." "Who?" Alexander asked, brow furrowed. Zan's wrinkled face darkened. "An ancient race. Once our allies before the Kral drove them into exile. Their technology was formidable." "Can we find them?" Hawkins pressed. Vox shrugged. "Perhaps if any survived." Alexander punched commands into the ship's computer. "It's our best shot. I'm launching long-range probes to scan for Krelok tech signatures." Hours ticked by as the probes scoured nearby systems. Alexander paced the bridge, tension coiling in his gut. Suddenly a console chirped. "We've got something," the sensor officer called out. "Faint trail leading to an uncharted nebula, galactic fringe." Alexander leaned over the display, heart racing. "That's it, plot a course." The combined fleet of human and Ferengi ships slipped into formation, engines flaring as they entered the swirling gases of the nebula. Brilliant colors danced across their hulls, crimson, emerald, sapphire. On the bridge, Alexander gripped the edge of his console. "Status?" "Kral scouts probing the outer nebula," the tactical officer reported. "They haven't detected us yet." Hawkins nodded. "Keep us silent, minimal power output." As they pressed deeper, the nebula's beauty turned deadly. Arcs of energy lashed out, slamming into their shields. A support ship to starboard buckled, its engines sputtering out. Electromagnetic interference off the charts, Vox shouted over the rumble of the ship. We're losing systems. The gases parted, revealing a haunting sight. Massive structures of alien design hung suspended in the void, their surfaces pitted and scarred. Fragments of debris drifted past the viewports. Zahn's eyes widened. By the sacred treasury, a Krylock outpost. Or what's left of it, Hawkins said grimly. Looks like one hell of a fight went down here. Alexander led an away team to the largest structure. Their boots clanged on ancient decking as they navigated corridors choked with centuries of dust. In what appeared to be a control center, a lone console still pulsed with feeble light. As they approached, a burst of alien speech filled their comms, a looping message in an indecipherable tongue. A distress call, Vox breathed. After all this time... Alexander's hands danced over the alien controls. I think I can access the navigational data. There's coordinates, another system. Back aboard their ships, the fleet pushed onward. They threaded their way through churning stellar nurseries, dodging half-formed planets and rogue asteroids. Alexander's breath caught as they emerged into a starscape littered with wreckage, shattered hulls and debris fields stretching as far as sensors could detect. A ping from the sensor array broke the somber silence. Energy signature, the officer reported, faint but active, originating from that planetoid. Alexander's heart raced as the away team's shuttle touched down on the barren world. They made their way to a hidden bunker, forcing open ancient doors. Inside, a lone stasis pod hummed softly. With trembling hands, Alexander activated the revival sequence. The pod hissed open, revealing a being unlike any he'd seen, tall, with iridescent scales and 4 arms. The alien's eyes fluttered open, focusing on Alexander with startling intensity. Who are you? The universal translator rendered the alien's rasping words. Alexander swallowed hard. I'm Lieutenant Alexander Bell of the Earth Fleet. We've come seeking the Krylock. The alien's eyes widened. I am Commander Arctin, and you have found all that remains of my people. Back aboard the ship, Arctin's tale unfolded. A horror story of genocide and desperate flight, the once mighty Krylock reduced to scattered remnants by Krall aggression. But you survived, Alexander pressed. Are there others? Any way to contact them? Arctin's alien features hardened. Perhaps. A few outposts may yet live, and if they do... His 4 hands clenched into fists. We will make the Krall pay for every Krylock life they stole. As Arctin's lone vessel fell into formation with the fleet, Alexander stared out at the stars. Somewhere out there the Krall armada approached. He took a deep breath, steeling himself for the confrontation to come. Alexander nodded, his heart made. He'd better, or we're all dead. Arctin's vessel glided silently into formation with the combined human-Ferengi fleet. Alexander watched from the bridge as the sleek Krylock ship took its place, its iridescent hull shimmering against the backdrop of stars. All ships, this is Commander Arctin, the alien's voice crackled over the fleet-wide channel. I have a plan to cripple the Krall forces. Alexander leaned forward, listening intently as Arctin outlined a daring sabotage operation. The Krylock's 4-armed silhouette appeared on the main view screen, gesturing as he spoke. We'll deploy infiltration pods to their capital ships, Arctin explained. Small teams will board covertly and take out key leadership. Within minutes, stealthy pods streaked away from Arctin's ship, each carrying a mixed team of human marines and Krylock commandos. Alexander found himself in one such pod, his heart pounding as they approached the massive Krall flagship. The pod latched onto the enemy vessel's hull with a muffled thunk. Alexander readied his weapon, exchanging a determined look with Arctin. With a hiss of equalizing pressure, the airlock opened. They moved swiftly through dimly lit corridors, encountering sporadic resistance. Arctin's 4 arms were a blur of motion as he incapacitated Krall warriors with ruthless efficiency. Alexander provided covering fire, his rifle spitting controlled bursts of energy. Bridge ahead, Arctin hissed, his scales rippling with tension. They burst onto the command deck in a storm of weapons fire. Kral officers fell before they could react. At the center of the chaos stood a towering figure, Supreme Commander Gorvak. "Surrender," Alexander demanded, his rifle trained on the Kral leader. Gorvak snarled, reaching for a control panel. Arctin's hand shot out, catching the Kral's wrist in an iron grip. "It's over," Arctin growled. As they secured Gorvak, Alexander's comm crackled to life. "Alex, it's Vox. I've got control of their weapons systems, shutting them down now." Across the Kral fleet, similar scenes played out. Boarding teams struck with surgical precision, sowing chaos and confusion. Alexander watched on tactical displays as the once organized Kral formation began to fragment. Captain Hawkins' voice cut through the din of battle. "All bomber wings, form up on me. We're going for their reactors." Alexander held his breath as he watched the bombing run unfold. Hawkins led his fighters through a hail of defensive fire, closing on their targets with unwavering focus. Antimatter warheads streaked away from the human ships, finding their marks with devastating accuracy. The void erupted in blinding flashes as Kral dreadnoughts were torn apart from within. Secondary explosions rippled across their hulls, leaving them shattered and powerless. Suddenly, alarms blared throughout the Kral flagship. Gorvak laughed coldly. "If I fall, I'm taking you with me." Alexander's eyes widened as he realized what was happening. He set the reactor to overload. Arctin grabbed Alexander's arm, dragging him toward the exit. "We need to move, now!" They raced through collapsing corridors as the ship shuddered around them. Alexander's comm buzzed urgently. "Alex, it's Vox. I'm jettisoning the bridge section. Get clear." With a bone-jarring lurch, the deck beneath their feet separated from the rest of the ship. Alexander stumbled, nearly losing his footing as the bridge module spun away into space. Through the viewports, he caught a glimpse of the flagship's main body erupting in a devastating antimatter explosion. As the shockwave dissipated, Alexander saw dozens of smaller vessels darting between the remaining Kral ships. Zahn's voice came over the comm, filled with fierce pride. "We're getting our people out. Hundreds of Ferengi, freed from Kral slave labor." Before Alexander could respond, space itself seemed to ripple and tear. A massive fleet of Krelok warships phased into existence, their weapons already charging. The Krelok dreadnoughts opened fire, their energy weapons carving through the weakened Kral ships like scythes through wheat. Those Kral vessels still capable of flight turned to flee, only to be hunted down with relentless precision. As the last echoes of battle faded, Alexander found himself aboard Arctin's command ship. The Krelok leader stood tall, one hand gripping Gorvak's shoulder. "You will answer for your crimes against my people," Arctin declared. Alexander looked out at the debris field that had once been the Kral armada. Captain Hawkins approached, clapping him on the back. "Hell of a fight, Lieutenant." Vox and Zahn joined them, the Ferengi's eyes gleaming with a mix of exhaustion and triumph. As they stood together, surrounded by the remnants of their defeated foe, Alexander felt a weight lift from his shoulders. They had faced... Alexander stood at the viewport, watching the debris field of the Kral armada drift silently through space. The victory felt hollow as he contemplated their next move. He turned to face the gathered leaders on the bridge. "We've dealt them a blow, but it's not enough," Alexander said, his voice tight. "We need to press our advantage before they can regroup." Captain Hawkins nodded, pulling up a holographic display. "Our analysts have been combing through the data we seized. Take a look at this." The hologram flickered, revealing coordinates and schematics for a massive facility. Arctin leaned in, his scales shimmering as he studied the image. "Her cloning facility," the Krelok commander hissed. "This is how they replenish their forces so quickly." Alexander's eyes hardened. "Then we hit it. Hard and fast before they can shore up their defenses." Arctin raised a four-fingered hand. "Wait, a direct assault could be costly. We should consider a more surgical approach." "Infiltration," Arctin replied. A small team could slip in, sabotage their systems from within. It would cripple their ability to produce warriors without risking our entire fleet. Zahn nodded vigorously, his large Ferengi ears quivering. I agree, we've lost too many already. A covert operation minimizes further casualties. Alexander paced, considering the options. He didn't like the idea of sneaking around, but the logic was sound. All right, he conceded. We'll do it your way, but I'm going in with the strike team. Hours later, Alexander found himself crouched in the hold of a Kree-Lock stealth ship, surrounded by a mix of human special forces and Kree-Lock commandos. Vox sat nearby, fiddling with a data pad. I've got the access codes, the Ferengi whispered. Should get us through the outer defenses without raising alarms. The ship touched down silently on the outskirts of the cloning facility. Alexander's heart raced as they exited, the alien landscape stretching before them. Massive structures loomed in the distance, their purpose chilling. They moved swiftly across open ground, Vox inputting codes at each security checkpoint. Alexander held his breath, half expecting alarms to blare at any moment, but they pressed on, undetected. Inside the facility, the true horror of the Krall's work became apparent. Row upon row of gestation tanks lined the walls, each containing a developing Krall warrior. Scientists moved between the tanks, adjusting dials and injecting strange fluids. Vox's eyes widened as he scanned a nearby console. By the blessed exchequer, he breathed. They're not just cloning, they're enhancing, modifying genetics to create some kind of super soldiers. Alexander's stomach churned. Then we end it now. Plant the charges at key structural points. We'll bring this whole place down. The team split up, placing antimatter explosives throughout the facility. Alexander worked quickly, his hands steady despite the stakes. As he armed the final charge, a shout rang out. The air filled with the screech of klaxons. Alexander sprinted for the rendezvous point, energy bolts sizzling past his head. He rounded a corner and slammed into Hawkins. They ran, the sounds of pursuit growing louder. Suddenly the floor beneath them buckled. A deafening roar filled the air as explosions ripped through the facility. Arctin must have triggered the charges early, Hawkins shouted over the din. The corridor collapsed behind them, sealing off their escape route. Alexander and Hawkins found themselves trapped, a single blast door separating them from the rest of the team. Hawkins' face set in a grim line. There's a maintenance tunnel that leads to the surface. It's our only shot. He turned to Alexander. You need to go, now. What? No, I'm not leaving you here, Alexander protested. Hawkins gripped his shoulder. That's an order, Lieutenant. One of us has to make it out to finish this fight. I'll buy you time. Alexander wanted to argue, but the look in Hawkins' eyes brooked no dissent. With a heavy heart, he nodded and turned toward the maintenance hatch. As Alexander crawled through the cramped tunnel, he heard the sound of weapons fire echoing behind him. The acrid smell of smoke filled his nostrils as he pushed onward, his lungs burning. Finally, he emerged onto the planet's surface. A Kree-Lock stealth ship decloaked nearby, its hatch opening. As Alexander stumbled aboard, he took one last look at the collapsing facility behind him. Back on the command ship, the strike team gathered to assess the mission's outcome. The cloning facility was destroyed, but the cost had been high. Arctin and Hawkins were gone, along with several others. Alexander stared at the tactical display, his voice heavy. We've dealt them a serious blow, but this isn't over. The Krall are still out there, and they won't stop until we've stopped them for good. Zahn nodded solemnly. The question is, do we take the fight to them? Strike at the heart of Krall territory? The bridge fell silent as the weight of the decision settled over them. Alexander knew that whatever they chose, the road ahead would be difficult, but they had come too far to turn back now. Alexander stood before the holographic display, studying the intricate network of fortifications surrounding the Kralthar system. The captured intelligence scrolled across the screen, revealing the heart of Krall power. This is it, he said, his voice tight. Their core worlds, their shipyards, everything. Arctin's scales rippled with tension as he examined the data. A direct assault would be suicide. We need to weaken their defenses from within, sow chaos in their ranks. Alexander shook his head. We don't have time for subtlety. Every day we delay, more innocents die. The debate raged for hours. Voices raised, fists pounded on tables. Alexander's throat grew hoarse as he argued his case. Finally, Zahn spoke up, his large ears twitching. Enough, Alexander is right. My people can't endure this genocide any longer. We strike hard, we strike fast. Arctin's 4 eyes blinked in resignation. Very well, the Krelok stand with you. Over the next weeks, the Allied fleet underwent a transformation. Alexander watched as newly commissioned human warships rolled out of space docks, their hulls gleaming. Ferengi engineers swarmed over the vessels, integrating stealth systems. Krelok technicians calibrated experimental cloaking devices. Alexander pored over intelligence reports, crafting an elaborate deception. He planted false data, leaked classified transmissions. All pointed to an impending attack on an unimportant Krall outpost. As the Allied armada prepared to move out, Alexander stood on the bridge of his new command, a state-of-the-art human dreadnought. Vox worked furiously at a nearby console, fingers dancing across holographic interfaces. Ferengi stealth pods are in position, Vox reported. Long-range sensors throughout Kraltha are going dark. Alexander nodded. All ships, initiate jump sequence. Space twisted and folded as the fleet executed a dizzying series of micro-jumps. They emerged from Krelok subspace corridors deep in Krall territory, undetected. We're inside their perimeter, Alexander said. All ships decloak and open fire. The void erupted in searing light as Allied weapons tore into Krall orbital facilities. Shipyards crumbled, defense platforms exploded. Alexander watched the tactical display, tracking the waves of destruction. Krall ships scrambled to respond, but Vox's cyber attacks left them in disarray. Contradictory orders flooded their comms, sensor ghosts confused their targeting systems. As they pressed deeper into the system, Alexander gave the order he dreaded. Initiate nuclear protocol. Cloaked bombers streaked past, unleashing their payloads on Krall worlds below. Alexander watched the detonations bloom across planet surfaces, his stomach churning at the devastating toll. Hours later, a transmission cut through the chaos. This is High Command. The Krall Empire surrenders unconditionally. Before Alexander could respond, alarms blared. A sizable Krall fleet had broken formation, accelerating away from the core worlds. They're on a vector for Ferengi space, Vox shouted. Scans show their weapons are hot. Alexander's blood ran cold. All Krelok vessels form up on me. We're going after them. They gave chase through the debris-strewn Kralthar system. Alexander's ship vibrated as it unleashed salvo after salvo at the fleeing Krall dreadnought. Enemy fire slammed into their shields, alarms wailing throughout the bridge. His ship dove, presenting a smaller target profile. As they came up underneath the Krall vessel, Alexander seized his chance. Fire everything. A storm of torpedoes and energy beams erupted from his ship, slamming into the Krall dreadnought's exposed underside. Explosions rippled across its hull as it listed, engines sputtering and dying. Alexander sagged in his chair, exhaustion washing over him as the last Krall ship fell silent. Alexander stood before the gathered leaders, his face gaunt from the grueling campaign against the Krall. The secret Ferengi colony bustled with activity as ships from the Allied armada docked for repairs and resupply. In a cavernous meeting hall, Zahn addressed the assembly of Ferengi elders, his voice carrying across the room. Today we forge a new path, Zahn proclaimed. The Grand Nagus himself has authorized this historic alliance between the Ferengi, humans, and Krelok. As the elders erupted in heated debate, Vox approached Alexander, his expression troubled. Lieutenant, I need to show you something, he whispered urgently. They slipped away to a nearby sensor station. Vox's fingers danced across the controls, bringing up a holographic display of deep space. Look here, he said, pointing to a cluster of anomalous readings. Unknown vessels moving through abandoned Krall corridors. Alexander leaned in, studying the data. Could be scavengers, he mused, or something worse. We need eyes out there. He strode back into the meeting hall, interrupting the proceedings. We may have a situation, Alexander announced. I propose sending reconnaissance probes to investigate these anomalies. Days later, Alexander paced the bridge of his command ship as the probes returned. The main view screen flickered to life, revealing a chilling sight. Dozens of crawl ships drifted lifelessly, their hulls breached by weapons of terrifying power. At the center of the carnage loomed a massive vessel of alien design. Krelok scientists pored over the data, their scales rippling with agitation. This ship bears the markings of the Raikol, one hissed, a cybernetic race not seen in 1,000 years. Arctin raised a hand. Wait, the Krelok commander cautioned. We know nothing of their true strength. A rash attack could doom us all. After heated debate, Alexander reluctantly agreed to Arctin's plan for a covert mission. Hours later, he found himself aboard a stealth shuttle with Vox and a team of Krelok commandos. Experimental Ferengi drones cloaked their approach as they neared the titanic Raikol vessel. They breached the hull through a docking port, the silence broken only by the hiss of their environmental suits. Alexander's stomach turned as they entered the ship proper. Bodies littered the corridors, crawl warriors and partially assimilated Raikol drones alike, frozen in their final moments. By the divine treasury, Vox breathed, scanning the carnage. What happened here? They pressed deeper into the ship, eventually reaching the sealed bridge. Alexander's hands flew over the alien controls, bypassing security protocols. The doors slid open with a groan of protesting metal. Inside they found the Raikol commander, a withered figure more machine than flesh. Implants sparked and sputtered across its body as it fixed Alexander with glowing cybernetic eyes. "Chelsea come too late," the Raikol rasped. "Our assimilation, their triggered crawl weapon systems failing." Alexander leaned in, his voice urgent. "What about the rest of your people?" The alien's face twisted in what might have been a smile. "Distress signal are sent. Raikol come to finish what we started." As the light faded from the commander's eyes, Alexander felt a chill run down his spine. He turned to his team, his voice grim. "We need to get back, now." Upon their return, Alexander briefed the Allied leadership. Zahn's large ears drooped as he processed the information. Arctin's scales had paled to a sickly hue. "If the Raikol truly are coming," Alexander said, his voice tight, "we need to be ready. It's time to call in every favor, every potential ally we can find. Because if we thought the crawl were bad—" He let the implications hang in the air, unspoken. The gathered leaders exchanged worried glances. The specter of a new, possibly greater threat loomed over them all. As they began to discuss strategy, Alexander couldn't shake the feeling that their trials were just the beginning. Alexander paced the bridge of his command ship, his eyes darting between tactical displays. The looming Raikol threat cast a pall over the Allied forces. He turned to Vox and Arctin, their faces etched with worry. "We need something," Alexander said, his voice tight. "Our best strategies look like child's play against their tech." Vox's fingers danced across a holographic interface. "What if we turn their own weapons against them?" Arctin's scales rippled with interest. "The virus that disabled the dreadnought we found." Alexander nodded, a plan forming. "Assemble our best, we're going back in." Hours later, Alexander led a team through the ghostly corridors of the derelict Raikol ship. The stench of decay mingled with ozone from sparking circuitry. They reached the ship's core, a pulsing mass of biomechanical tissue. "Thither," Alexander pointed. "Extract the samples, quickly." As they worked, distant thuds echoed through the hull. Alexander's comm crackled. "Sir, we've got company. Raikol salvage teams incoming." They sprinted back to their shuttle, sample containers clutched tight. As they undocked, Alexander glimpsed sleek Raikol ships through the viewports. His heart raced as they escaped into the debris field. Back at the Ferengi research station, Alexander watched scientists in hermetically sealed suits work feverishly. One approached, holding up a vial of swirling nanites. "We've done it," the scientist said. "An airborne variant that can penetrate their defenses." Alexander nodded grimly. "Load it into the stealth missiles. We're running out of time." "Long-range sensors detecting Raycole signatures," a technician reported. "Massive fleet incoming." Alexander took a deep breath. "All ships maintain stealth protocols. Wait for my signal." The Raycole armada emerged from hyperspace, a vast swarm of biomechanical nightmares. Alexander's hands tightened on the command console. Stealth missiles streaked out, invisible to Raycole sensors. They struck home, punching through hull plating. Alarms blared as the virus took hold. "Sir, it's working!" Vox shouted. "Their systems are failing." Alexander allowed himself a small smile. "All ships, open fire, take them apart." The Allied fleet surged forward, railguns blazing. Raycole ships spasmed, their weapons going dark. Explosions blossomed across their hulls as Alliance fire tore through compromised shields. Suddenly, a massive energy surge registered on Alexander's displays. The Raycole flagship, a behemoth dwarfing all others, launched swarms of smaller craft. "Air-evasive maneuvers," Alexander ordered. "Vox, can you jam them?" Vox's hands flew across his console. "I'm trying, but their AIs are adapting. I can't—" He screamed, his body convulsing as feedback surged through his neural interface. Alexander watched in horror as Vox slumped over, smoke rising from his implants. "No!" Alexander shouted. He turned to his tactical officer. "Target that flagship, everything we've got." Arctin's voice came over the comm. "We're with you, Alexander. Krelok forces moving to engage." Alexander watched as Arctin's dreadnoughts plunged toward the Raycole flagship, guns blazing. The massive ship shuddered under the assault, its spires beginning to crumble. "Sir," his sensor officer called out, "new contacts detected. It's another armada." Alexander stared at the tactical display, his blood running cold. A vast fleet of unknown design approached, dwarfing even the Raycole forces. Zahn's voice crackled over the comm. "Alexander, we've done the impossible today. Whatever comes next, we face it together." Alexander nodded, his eyes hardened. He gazed out at the stars, knowing the battle was not nearly finished. You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.